Lysander Quill wasn't having a good day. Then again, when your job involves steering a ragtag collection of humanity's leftovers through the galaxy, good days tend to be rarer than a clean spacesuit. I swear, he muttered, watching as the planet loomed into view on the bridge display, if this place isn't an absolute dump, I'll eat my own helmet. Amara Voss, the fleet's resident scientist and eternal buzzkill, glanced up from her console with a smirk. If you eat that helmet, Quill, we're going to need a new captain. Maybe one with more sense of direction. Sense of direction, Quill shot back, running a hand through his perpetually unkempt hair. I got us here, didn't I? Right on schedule too. Only 5 detours and a close encounter with a black hole. Minor details, Amara replied dryly. Let's just hope there's something here worth the fuel we burned getting to this glorified space rock. Below them, the alien world spun lazily, a shimmering expanse of crystalline forest that promised either salvation or the kind of doom that left your ancestors spinning in their graves. The fleet, a mismatched collection of ships that looked like they'd been slapped together with duct tape and dreams, hung in orbit, waiting for orders. "All right, people," Quill said, toggling the ship-wide intercom. "We've made it to our next thrilling stop on the galaxy's least entertaining road trip. Let's try not to die horribly, shall we?" "That's what I love about you, Captain," Jules Kint chimed in over the crackling comms, the fleet's chief engineer and unofficial morale booster. "Always setting the bar just a little bit lower than rock bottom. Keeps everyone from being disappointed," Quill replied. "Now, let's get down there and see if this place is as shiny up close as it is from up here. Amara, you ready to meet some alien plants?" "Can't wait," Amara said, her voice dripping with as much sarcasm as humanly possible. "Maybe they'll be friendlier than the last bunch of rocks we chatted up." The landing shuttle was as cramped and uncomfortable as the rest of their life in space. Quill, Amara, and Jules crammed inside along with a few other lucky volunteers who drew the short straws. The descent was less a graceful glide and more a controlled fall, the kind that made everyone second-guess their life choices. "You know, I think I preferred the black hole," Jules remarked as they bounced off another pocket of turbulence. "Black holes don't have breathable atmospheres," Quill shot back, gripping his restraint harness like it owed him money. "Details," Jules shrugged. The shuttle broke through the cloud cover, revealing the alien landscape in all its crystal-laden glory. Trees, if you could call them that, rose like jagged spikes of glass, refracting the sunlight into blinding rainbows. It was beautiful in that, "oh God, I hope this doesn't kill us" kind of way. "Think we can sell it as a tourist destination?" Amara wondered aloud, eyes fixed on the scanner data scrolling across her screen. "Only if we want tourists who are into getting sliced open by the scenery," Quill replied. "Jules, what's the word on setting up the base?" "Ground stable, air's breathable, and radiation levels won't give us glowing skin," Jules confirmed. "It's practically paradise." "Paradise," Amara snorted. "Let's hope we don't find the snake." Their makeshift camp popped up quickly, another testament to humanity's knack for turning nothing into something slightly less useless. Tents, equipment, and a perimeter of hastily erected defenses in case of unfriendly neighbors. "I'm betting 20 creds the locals are a bunch of homicidal crystals," Jules said, slapping the last solar panel into place on the generator. "That's the spirit," Quill said, surveying the camp. "Always the optimist, Jules. Maybe we'll get lucky and meet some friendly rock people instead." Amara's voice came over the comms, a mix of excitement and concern that usually meant something important or, at least interesting, was about to happen. "Quill, we've got a problem. Already." "We just got here," Quill replied, trudging through the uneven terrain towards the makeshift lab Amara had set up. She was hunched over a console, surrounded by a tangle of wires and equipment that looked like it had been cobbled together by a mad scientist with a love of duct tape. "Check this out," she said, gesturing to the screen. "That looks like a lot of squiggly lines," Quill observed, squinting at the data. "Exactly," Amara said, pointing to a particularly aggressive spike. That right there is a signal, low frequency but strong enough to influence things. Influence things, Quill repeated. Like make us all dance the cha-cha against our will. Amara's expression was grim. More like make us dance straight off a cliff. We've got ourselves an alien mind control wave. Oh, fantastic, Quill said, rubbing his temples. And here I thought we'd get a nice vacation. Don't worry, Captain. Jules's voice crackled over the comms again. I'm sure it means us no harm. Right, Quill muttered. Let's just hope it doesn't want us to start worshipping it or something. They spent the next few hours trying to unravel the mystery of the signal, each oscillation a mocking reminder of their precarious situation. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the crystalline forest in ominous shadows. We could just leave, Jules suggested, not entirely joking. And go where? Amara replied. We're here now. Might as well figure out if this planet wants to kill us before we hightail it. Always the optimist, Quill said, repeating Jules's earlier words. All right, let's call it a night. Tomorrow, we try and figure out if the crystal forest has a mind of its own or if we're just paranoid. As the crew settled into their makeshift camp, the forest seemed to hum with its own life, the air tingling with unspoken promises and unrelenting malice. Quill couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, each crystal tree a silent sentinel in the deepening dark. Do you think it knows we're here? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper as they huddled around a flickering lantern. Quill considered the question, wondering if the forest was listening, plotting. I think, he said slowly, that if it does, we're going to be in for one hell of a surprise. Jules chuckled, a sound that was more nerves than humor. Well, at least it can't get any worse, right? The words hung in the air, an unintentional challenge to the universe. Tomorrow promised clarity or chaos or, most likely, both in spades. As sleep claimed them one by one, the alien world continued its silent vigil, the mind control wave a constant, haunting lullaby. And somewhere, deep within the crystalline heart of the forest, something listened and learned and waited. The next morning, the alien sun clawed its way over the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows through the crystalline forest like a beast stretching its claws. Quill squinted into the light, still half asleep, and already regretting every choice that had led him here. The air was sharp with the tang of alien flora and the unspoken threat of a mind control wave, a perfect environment for questioning one's life decisions. Jules stumbled out of his tent, hair standing at erratic angles that could only be achieved with the aid of multiple nightmares. Morning, Captain, or as I like to call it, the precursor to today's inevitable disaster. Optimism before breakfast, Quill grunted. I appreciate that. They were joined by Amara carrying a mug of something that might have once been coffee in a kinder universe. So, have we figured out if these plants want to eat us or just enslave us? One step at a time, Quill replied, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Let's start with a stroll through Murder Forest and see what weirdness is out there. Great, Amara said, draining her mug. Nothing like a good bit of exploring before we all lose our minds. The team gathered their gear, equipped with a mix of standard-issue exploration tools and improvised gadgets that looked like they'd been concocted by a particularly sadistic engineer. Every step into the forest felt like a gamble, the ground crunching underfoot with a sound like shattering glass. Anyone else feel like they're being watched? Jules asked, keeping a wary eye on the crystalline trees. Or is that just the existential dread talking? Probably both, Amara said, fiddling with her scanner. Don't worry, Jules, if something tries to kill us, you'll be the second to know. They pushed deeper into the forest, the air growing thicker with an undercurrent of static that danced over their skin like an electric promise. The trees groaned with each gust of wind, a symphony of glassy sighs that set Quill's teeth on edge. What's the scanner saying? Quill asked Amara, who was waving the device around like a divining rod at an alien carnival. Same as yesterday, she replied, arching an eyebrow. That signal is strong, like someone left the mind control machine on high and forgot about it. How responsible of them, Quill muttered. As they trudged on, the wildlife started to show itself, although something was definitely off. A small, furry creature, imagine a squirrel crossed with a porcupine and a bad attitude, darted across their path, stopping to stare at them with beady eyes filled with disconcerting intelligence. And if Quill wasn't mistaken, pure disdain. "Does that thing look smarter than it should?" Jules whispered, pointing. "Smarter and definitely judging us," Amara agreed. "I don't think I like it." "Join the club," Quill said, waving a hand to shoo the creature away. It scampered off, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. "You think the signal's affecting the animals, too?" Jules asked, glancing nervously around. "Wouldn't be surprised," Amara said, checking her scanner again. "If it's strong enough to mess with us, why not them?" "Great," Quill sighed. "Mind-controlling squirts, just what we needed." They moved on, the forest seeming to close in around them, branches arching like spindly fingers reaching for their sanity. It was a relief when they finally broke into a clearing, though the sight that greeted them was anything but comforting. A massive crystalline structure loomed ahead, glistening in the light like a jagged monument to alien architecture. It wasn't just the size that was unnerving, it was the way it seemed to pulse, a deep, resonant thrum that matched the frequency of the signal Amara had detected. "That's not ominous at all," Jules said, eyes wide. "Should we knock or just wait for it to invite us in?" "Probably both," Amara said, her voice tight. "Quill, this could be the source of the signal, or just the source of our impending doom," Quill replied, unable to tear his eyes from the structure. "Let's get some readings and head back. I don't want to stick around long enough to find out if this place has a fondness for visitors." As they set up their equipment, the air seemed to vibrate with unseen energy, each wave a subtle pressure that pressed against their skulls. The sensation was almost hypnotic, compelling in a way that made rational thought feel like a distant memory. "Anyone else feel like their brains trying to escape their skull?" Jules asked, rubbing his temples. "Just another day in paradise," Quill said, adjusting their transmission equipment. "Let's get this done and get out of here before we start singing Kumbaya in alien harmonics." Amara's scanner beeped insistently, and she frowned at the data. "The signal's intensifying. If we stay here much longer, we might end up part of the local wildlife." "Sounds like our cue to leave," Quill said, packing up their gear in record time. "Let's head back to camp and see if we can figure out how to block this thing." As they made their way back, the forest seemed to close in tighter than before, each step dragging them deeper into a fog of apprehension. It wasn't just the mind control wave. There was something else, a presence lurking just out of sight, watching with a patience that was entirely alien. They reached the camp just as the sun was beginning its descent, turning the sky a bruised shade of purple. The crew gathered around their makeshift command center, the tension as thick as the atmosphere. "Well, that was fun," Jules said, collapsing into a chair. "Who's ready for round 2 of Let's Not Die Horribly?" "First, let's figure out how to block this signal," Quill said, pacing like a caged animal. "Amara, any ideas?" "Working on it," she replied, tapping furiously at her console. "In the meantime, we should isolate ourselves from the signal as much as possible. The less exposure, the better." "Great," Quill said, running a hand through his hair. "So we're stuck on an alien planet that wants to turn us into mindless drones. How did I not see this coming?" "At least we know what we're up against," Amara pointed out. "That's more than we can say for the last few planets." "True," Jules said, chuckling darkly. "Remember the carnivorous fog? Good times." "Yeah," Quill said, though his tone was grim. "This time we need to be smarter. We can't afford to lose anyone." As night fell, the crew huddled together, trying to ignore the hum of the signal that seemed to have wormed its way into their bones. The crystalline forest glowed eerily under the alien moon, a haunting reminder of their precarious predicament. "Do you really think we can block the signal?" Jules asked, his voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the silence. "We have to," Amara replied, her gaze fixed on the distant glow of the crystalline structure. "There's no other choice." "And if we can't?" Quill asked, his voice a low rumble in the still night air. "Then we figure something else out," Amara said, meeting his gaze with steady determination. We're not giving up. Not now. Quill nodded, though his thoughts were far from hopeful. They were out of options, out of luck, but not out of time, not yet. The signal pulsed in the background, a ceaseless whisper that promised madness and control. Tomorrow we go back, Quill said decisively. We find a way to shut it down, or at least dampen it. We can't let this place win. The night stretched on, the signal a constant presence that tugged at the edges of their consciousness. Sleep was a fleeting luxury, snatched in fitful bursts, their dreams haunted by the crystalline forest and the promise of what lay within. As the alien sun began its climb into the sky once more, Quill stood, determination etched into his features. "All right, team," he said, voice steady despite the chaos brewing within. "Let's see if we can't outsmart a bunch of alien rocks." "Finally," Jules said, grinning despite the tension. "A challenge worthy of our stupidity. And our stubbornness," Amara added, joining them. The crew gathered their equipment once more, the prospect of returning to the crystalline structure both daunting and necessary. Each step forward was a challenge to the oppressive hum of the signal, a defiance that resonated with the raw tenacity of the human spirit. "Ready to face the music?" Jules asked, adjusting his pack. Quill nodded, casting a glance at the crystalline spires glittering in the distance. "Let's show this planet what happens when you mess with humanity." They set off, the forest closing around them with familiar menace. The signal pulsed through the trees, a constant reminder of the enemy they faced. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, they pressed on, driven by the stubborn refusal to surrender that defined their species. "Any bets on how many of us make it back in one piece?" Jules quipped, trying to lighten the mood. "No bets," Quill replied, his voice resolute. "We're all making it back. One way or another." Amara glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "You know, for an eternal pessimist, you sure have a way with motivational speeches." "It's a curse," Quill said, chuckling. "Now let's go kick some alien ass." And with that they moved forward into the heart of the forest, determined to outwit the mind-controlling menace that threatened their freedom. As they marched, the signal's hum seemed to falter, if only slightly, a hint of unease in the steady rhythm. Perhaps, against all odds, this ragtag band of survivors could triumph after all. The crystal forest awaited, its secrets locked away in the labyrinthine depths. But the crew was ready, armed with wit and will, prepared to do whatever it took to reclaim their minds and their lives. "Game on, you shiny bastards," Quill muttered under his breath, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "Let's see who blinks first." The morning started with the usual charm of a hangover without the fun prior evening, a persistent buzz in your brain, a taste in your mouth suggesting something died there, and a creeping realization that today could only get worse. Quill stood at the edge of their campsite, looking at the crystalline forest, the alien architecture glinting like it had something to prove. No doubt it thought it was better than him. He wasn't about to argue. Jules, bleary-eyed and perpetually disheveled, stumbled over with a cup of something that, if it wasn't coffee, was doing a marvelous impression of it. "Why do I get the feeling we should have brought more duct tape?" he muttered, taking a sip and grimacing as though he just swallowed a live eel. "And real coffee. Duct tape might hold our ships together," Amara interjected, adjusting her handheld scanner with the air of someone who knew exactly how screwed they were. "But it won't fix brain rot." Quill grunted, running a hand through his hair, already sticking up in defiance of gravity and fashion. "Let's see if we can't counter this mind control wave. I've got enough nonsense rattling around up here without some alien telepath adding to it." They gathered around their makeshift control unit, a contraption of wires and screens that looked like it had been cobbled together by a child with a fondness for chaos and spare parts. Quill flicked a switch, hoping for a miracle. What they got was a whine, a pop, and a wisp of smoke that curled up like a sigh from a disappointed god. "Well, that was underwhelming," Jules deadpanned, waving the smoke away with a half-hearted flap of his hand. "Guess we're going to have to get creative." Amara leaned over the controls, her eyes narrowing as if she could will the technology to cooperate through sheer force of disdain. The more I look at this, the more I think we're trying to put a band-aid on a black hole. The waveform patterns are too complex. Translation for those of us who didn't major in technobabble, Quill asked, crossing his arms. Translation, we're screwed, Amara replied. The signal's too embedded in the environment. It's not just hitting us, it's saturating everything, including those judgmental squirms, Jules groaned, shooting a suspicious glance at the forest. Great. Just what we needed. A full ecosystem listening to our every thought. Hope it doesn't have a Yelp account. With a resigned sigh, Quill turned back to their failing equipment. Can't we boost our signal, maybe override it, change the frequency? I'd even settle for giving us a little space in our own heads. We could try jamming it, Amara suggested, tapping a few buttons. But it's like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. We're not exactly equipped for subtlety. Subtlety's overrated, Quill said, a grin flickering across his lips. Let's throw a Hail Mary and see if it sticks. Jules shrugged, offering a half-hearted salute. Here's to hoping we don't end up lobotomized. Again, they toyed with the controls, each attempt feeling like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded and underwater. With every tweak, the forest seemed to pulse in response, the crystalline structure a silent observer judging their efforts. Occasionally, the tech would emit a noise that might have been a gurgle of encouragement. More likely, it was laughing at them. As midday crawled in, bringing with it the oppressive static of the mind control wave, Amara's lips twisted into a grim smile. I've got something. Her fingers danced over the console, a melody of taps and swipes. The signal is affecting cognitive functions, but humans seem partially resistant, she explained, eyes bright with the kind of discovery that came wrapped in barbed wire. It's like we're wired wrong for them, or right, depends on your viewpoint. Probably the former, Quill said. We are notoriously stubborn and stupid, Jules leaned in, curious despite himself. So what? We're too dumb or too smart for them to control, maybe a bit of both, Amara replied. Our brains aren't as compatible with whatever they are using. It gives us an edge. Edge is good, Quill said. I like edge. Edge sounds survivable, until they figure out a way to adjust, Amara cautioned. We're not out of the woods yet. If we ever leave these woods, I'm buying everyone a drink, Jules declared, though he didn't sound too convinced they'd ever see a bar again. The afternoon passed in a haze of static and frustration. Every tweak to the equipment felt like a new layer of futility, each failure another brick in the wall they were building between themselves and sanity. The crystalline hum wormed its way deeper, a tune with no end and too much bass. Finally, as the alien sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across their camp, a different kind of hum filled the air, a low, keening wail that set their teeth on edge. What the hell is that? Quill asked, jerking his head toward the sound. Whatever it is, it's not on our playlist, Jules said, checking his instruments with the air of someone who expected them to turn into snakes at any moment. Amara's eyes narrowed at her scanner, a look of annoyance crossing her face. It's the signal, amplifying. It's like it knows we're trying to shut it out. And it's pissed. Quill felt a growl of frustration rise in his throat. Think it's figured out our trick looks that way, Amara replied. We need to move, keep adjusting. It's a race now, a race against rocks, Jules muttered. I always knew I'd die doing something ridiculous. Not today, you're not, Quill said, determination hardening his voice. Let's see if we can't give these rocks a run for their money. They redoubled their efforts, the campsite a flurry of activity as they tried to keep one step ahead of the ever-adapting wave. It was a game of cat and mouse, except the cat was a planet, and they were the mouse that couldn't stop talking back. As the sun disappeared, taking with it the last vestiges of warmth, Quill finally leaned back, rubbing his eyes. We can't keep this up forever. Ideas? Amara shrugged, the picture of a woman who'd reached the end of her rope and started knitting with it. There's a chance we could exploit our brain's resistance. Use it as a feedback loop. Sounds risky, Jules said, eyeing her warily. It is, she agreed, but it might just be crazy enough to work. Quill considered it, weighing their options or lack thereof. All right, let's do it. If it doesn't work, we'll just have another thing to complain about. With a newfound sense of purpose, they set about adjusting the equipment, each movement filled with the quiet desperation of the damned. They were betting everything on this one last shot, a gamble with odds so long they could see them bending around the corner. As the night deepened, Quill couldn't help but feel an odd sense of calm settle over him. Maybe it was the absurdity of their situation, or maybe it was the knowledge that whatever happened, they'd gone down swinging. "Ready?" Amara asked, her fingers poised over the controls. "Ready," Quill replied, nodding to Jules, who gave a mock salute. With a deep breath, Amara activated the feedback loop, the campsite coming alive with a symphony of beeps and whirs that sounded like a choir of malfunctioning droids. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the oppressive hum began to wane, the forest releasing its grip on their minds. It was as if the planet itself had taken a step back, a pause in the relentless assault. Quill exhaled, a laugh of disbelief escaping his lips. "Did we just?" "I think we did," Amara said, a note of wonder in her voice. Jules grinned, the expression barely visible in the low light. "I'd hate to jinx it, but I think we pulled it off. For now," Quill cautioned, though he couldn't suppress the flicker of hope that flared in his chest. The night stretched on, filled with the whispers of wind through the crystalline spires. For the first time since they'd landed, the silence felt like an ally rather than an adversary. As they settled into rest, the crew exchanged weary smiles, the relief palpable. They'd managed to hold their own against the mind control wave, at least for now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight they had a small victory to savor. And on this alien world, that was more than they dared hope for. "Think the rocks are sulking?" Jules asked, breaking the quiet. "I hope so," Amara answered, leaning back against her pack. "Maybe they'll learn not to mess with humans, or maybe they'll come at us harder tomorrow," Quill said, his tone light despite the gravity of his words. "But that's tomorrow's problem," Amara replied, her voice carrying a quiet confidence. "Right now we sleep." Quill nodded, casting one last glance at the forest. The crystalline structure loomed in the distance, a reminder of the challenges yet to come. But for the first time he felt they might just stand a chance. Sleep came slowly, but it came, carrying dreams of a world where mind control was a punchline, not a threat. And as the crew drifted off, the alien night watched over them, its secrets still locked away. For now, they'd done the impossible. Tomorrow, they'd face whatever fresh hell awaited them with the same stubborn defiance that had brought them this far. "Good night, you shiny bastards," Quill muttered, eyes slipping closed. And somewhere in the crystalline depths, the planet seemed to blink. The morning after their improbable victory was a dreary affair, as most mornings tend to be when you wake up on a hostile alien planet with nothing but a thin blanket of hope and a thicker one of impending doom. Lysander Quill, hair valiantly defying gravity in all the wrong ways, was the first to rise. He shuffled to the edge of their campsite, a bleary-eyed commander surveying the absurdity of the crystalline forest. "Well, good morning to you too, you judgmental heap of rocks," he muttered, squinting at the glinting spires. Somewhere behind him, Jules was performing his morning ritual of cursing at the lack of real coffee, while Amara fiddled with her handheld scanner like a mother duck trying to make sense of her technologically advanced ducklings. "Still feeling optimistic?" Jules asked, his voice a gravelly mix of sarcasm and disbelief as he joined Quill, cradling a mug of something that might have been coffee in a past life. "Optimism died the day I took this job," Quill replied, rubbing his temples. "But I'm feeling slightly less pessimistic than usual, so that's something." Amara wandered over, eyes glued to her scanner. "The wave's still there, but it's quieter, like it's sulking in a corner, plotting our demise." "Great," Jules said, "because that's what we need." "Passive-aggressive rocks could be worse," Quill shrugged. "They could be aggressively aggressive, and how's that different from passive-aggressive?" Amara asked, arching an eyebrow. "More broken bones, fewer emotional scars." Quill suggested, though he didn't sound entirely convinced himself. They stood in silence, the air around them thick with static and the faint, ever-present hum of the mind control wave. It was like a particularly annoying song stuck in the back of their minds, except the song was trying to brainwash them into oblivion. "Got any bright ideas today?" Quill asked, looking at Amara. "Not unless you call Don't Die a bright idea," she replied, tapping the side of her scanner. "Though I suppose we could always try to use the crystals to our advantage." Jules perked up at that, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "You mean like harnessing their energy? Turn the tables on them," Quill snorted. "You make it sound so straightforward, like frying an egg." "Hey, I'm just spitballing here," Jules said, throwing his hands up defensively. "If we could somehow channel the crystal's properties, maybe we could counteract the wave, or make our heads explode. Either way, we'd find out. Exploding heads aren't exactly the outcome we're aiming for," Amara pointed out. Jules shrugged. "Depends on whose heads, really." Quill rubbed his chin thoughtfully, the gears in his mind turning at a speed that was frankly unsafe for such early Ayurs. "All right, let's say we go with this plan. What's the worst that could happen?" "Well," Amara began, ticking off on her fingers, "we could amplify the wave instead of countering it. We could destabilize the crystal's structure and cause a catastrophic implosion. Or we could just make things worse in a way we can't even predict." "Good, good," Quill nodded. "I do love a plan with a wide range of potential disasters." Jules grinned, a lopsided smirk that was both charming and vaguely unhinged. "What's life without a little risk? Longer, for one," Amara deadpanned. But despite her skepticism, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or the faintest hint of hope. It was the kind of look that said, "This is crazy, but I'd hate myself if I didn't try." "All right," Quill said, clapping his hands together with the enthusiasm of a man resigned to his fate. "Let's try not to blow ourselves up before breakfast." They set to work, Jules sketching out a rough plan on a piece of scrap metal while Amara ran calculations on her scanner. Quill mostly watched, occasionally offering a suggestion or a sarcastic comment when the mood struck him. "You know," Jules mused as he tightened a series of bolts on the makeshift control unit, "if this doesn't work, we could always just start worshipping the rocks. Maybe they'd cut us a break, or smite us where we stand," Amara said, not looking up from her work. "Hard to predict the whims of sentient geology. Sounds like marriage," Quill remarked, earning him a snort from Jules and a glare from Amara. "Done," she announced eventually, stepping back to admire their handiwork, or what passed for it under the circumstances. The contraption looked like a deranged artist's impression of a Rubik's Cube, all wires and glowing panels, held together by nothing more than duct tape and fervent prayers. "So, what now?" Quill asked, crossing his arms. "Now," Amara said, taking a deep breath, "we test it." "By test it, you mean turn it on and hope for the best, right?" Jules asked, a gleam of mischief in his eyes. "Exactly," Amara confirmed, her finger hovering over the activation button. "Any last words?" "Yeah," Quill said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Let's hope these rocks aren't holding a grudge." With that, Amara pressed the button. There was a moment of tense silence, the calm before the inevitable storm. Then the contraption hummed to life, emitting a series of beeps and flashes that could have been promising or ominous, depending on your level of cynicism. The air around them seemed to vibrate, a low, thrumming energy that set their teeth on edge. For a moment, it felt like they were standing at the epicenter of a storm, the world holding its breath. Then, slowly, the oppressive hum of the mind control wave began to shift. The sound didn't disappear exactly, but it changed frequency, the pitch rising to a level that was just beyond hearing. It was like the planet was tuning them out, its attention shifting elsewhere. "I think it's working," Amara said, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. "Or we just pissed it off," Jules remarked, though he couldn't quite suppress the grin spreading across his face. Quill exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "Whatever it is, it's better than what we had. For a moment, they allowed themselves to bask in their success, the thrill of having achieved the impossible. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of hope. "All right, let's not get too comfortable," Quill said, breaking the moment. "We've got a lot more to figure out before we can call this place home. But for now," Jules said, throwing an arm around Amara's shoulders, "I'd say we deserve a break." Amara allowed herself a small smile, the tension in her posture easing. "I suppose we can afford a few minutes to enjoy the view." Quill nodded, a rare flicker of optimism in his eyes. "Let's hope our luck holds." They stood there for a while, watching as the alien sun crept higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape. For the first time since they'd landed, the planet felt almost welcoming, a place with potential rather than peril. "Do you think the rocks are gone for good?" Jules asked, his tone light. "Doubtful," Amara replied. "But at least they're not trying to rewrite our brains anymore. Here's to small mercies," Quill said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast, "and the idiots who managed to survive the impossible. And to the next impossible thing," Jules added, his grin widening. Amara chuckled softly, a sound that was both weary and hopeful. "Yeah. What's life without a little insanity? Boring," Quill answered, a touch of mischief in his voice. "And we can't have that now, can we?" They shared a laugh, the sound echoing through the crystalline forest, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humor could still be found. It was a fragile thing, a spark in the dark, but it was theirs. And so, with the weight of uncertainty still looming, the crew of the ragtag fleet stood together, ready to face whatever new challenges awaited them on this alien world. They had survived another day, and for now, that was enough. As they turned back to their work, Quill couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. They were a mismatched ragtag group, held together by duct tape, dreams, and a shared refusal to give up. In a universe where hope was as rare as real coffee, they were a testament to stubbornness and human tenacity. And as they continued their journey, one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together, with laughter, sarcasm, and a healthy disdain for rocks. The crystalline forest shimmered menacingly, as if the planet was just biding its time before it got serious about mind control. The ragtag fleet, held together by more luck than engineering, stood in the heart of this alien world, and things were unraveling faster than a cheap sweater in a bar fight. Quill, with his hair looking like it had been styled by an angry cat, stood at the campsite's edge again, this time watching the chaos unfold like a spectator at a particularly gruesome sporting event. He rubbed his temples, the hangover a dull throb competing with the rising cacophony of madness around him. "They're losing it," he muttered, not to anyone in particular. Past his shoulder, the sound of animals screeching and thrashing in the crystalline forest filled the air, a wild orchestra of chaos. Amara was at his side, her scanner beeping with the sort of frantic urgency that would have sent a less jaded person into a panic. She glanced at the scanner, then at the unfolding pandemonium, and then back to Quill. "You think they're just having a bad day, or are we officially boned?" "Let's go with boned," Quill replied, his voice dry as Martian sand. "Keeps expectations manageably low." Jules, the fleet's chief engineer and the closest thing they had to a morale officer, was pacing like a caged animal. His previous grin had vanished, replaced by an expression that suggested he was contemplating the merits of a swift, cowardly retreat. "Hey, Jules," Quill called out. "Any bright ideas that don't involve us running like hell?" Jules stopped, scratched his head, and then shrugged with the kind of casual resignation only found in those familiar with impending doom. "We could try singing to them. I hear music soothes the savage beast." "Yeah, but our singing probably sounds like a dying cat to them," Amara shot back. "And I don't think we have the time to form a choir." "Point taken," Jules acknowledged, not losing his sarcastic edge. "Then how about we just tie ourselves to the ship? You know, like Odysseus and the Sirens." Quill snorted. "All we need is some wax for our ears." Oh wait, we used it all up plugging the leaks in the coolant system. As if on cue, a loud crash echoed from the nearby jungle, followed by the unmistakable roar of some alien creature that clearly hadn't read the script on staying safely out of sight. "That's new," Amara said, trying to peer through the thickening static in the air. "Did you guys order a monster with your existential crisis?" "Not unless it comes with fries," Quill replied, his eyes narrowing. "Jules, get the makeshift control unit ready. We're going in full mad scientist mode." "On it," Jules said, jogging over to the haphazard device they'd cobbled together earlier. "Let's hope we don't accidentally summon something worse." There was a grim energy to their movements now, the kind that came when you realized you had no choice but to roll the dice and bet on bad odds. The air felt like it was clinging to them, each breath a reminder that the planet was very much alive and not fond of visitors overstaying their welcome. Quill, Amara, and Jules gathered around the contraption, the air tense with anticipation and a smidgen of dread. Amara adjusted a few dials, her expression a mix of concentration and disbelief that they were, once again, about to try something that could end in a literal brain-melting experience. "Ready?" she asked, her finger hovering over the activation button. "About as ready as I'll ever be to dance with the devil," Quill muttered, crossing his arms. Jules gave a half-hearted thumbs up. "Let's give our alien friends an encore." Amara pressed the button, and the contraption hummed to life, emitting a bizarre symphony of electronic bleeps and bloops like a malfunctioning arcade game. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air itself seemed to recoil, the static shifting and writhing like a living thing. A low, menacing growl rumbled through the forest, sending a shiver down their spines. "Okay, not the reaction I was hoping for," Jules mumbled, fiddling with the controls. "Give it a second," Amara said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. The growl intensified, turning into a roar that made the ground tremble. The trees around them seemed to lean in, as if drawn by the chaos, their crystalline branches humming with tension. Just when it seemed like they were about to witness a full-blown planetary tantrum, the sound abruptly cut off, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. It was the kind of silence that made you long for the comforting noise of impending doom. At least that way, you knew what to expect. Quill exhaled slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Well, that was dramatic." Amara checked her scanner, her brow furrowed. "The wave's still there, but it feels scattered, like it's trying to regroup." "Good news, bad news then," Jules said, rubbing his hands together. "Good news is we're not dead. Bad news is whatever's out there might be rethinking its strategy." Quill nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "So we're buying time at best. But if we can figure out how to mess with the wave's frequency more permanently," Amara grinned, a gleam of determination in her eyes, "then maybe we can actually turn this mess around. Or just irritate it enough to self-destruct," Jules added. "Either way, we win." "Let's call that Plan B," Quill replied, his tone light despite the grim situation. "Meanwhile, let's see if we can keep everyone from tearing each other apart." They moved quickly, their actions driven by a mix of desperation and stubbornness. The atmosphere among the crew was tense, with tempers fraying faster than a cheap wire in a faulty circuit. Arguments flared up over nothing, the stress of the situation pushing everyone to their limits. Quill found himself playing mediator more often than he'd like, stepping in to diffuse conflicts before they could escalate into full-blown brawls. "Is it too much to ask for a little peace and quiet?" he grumbled after breaking up yet another shouting match over something as trivial as rations. "Peace and quiet," Jules echoed with a snort. "On this rock." "You might as well ask for a miracle." Amara joined them, looking frazzled but resolute. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against a crate. "If we can keep the crew focused on a common goal, we might be able to hold it together long enough to find a real solution. And what's more unifying than a shared hatred of mind-controlling rocks?" Quill replied with a wry smile. "Exactly," Amara said, her eyes alight with a rare spark of hope. "We need a plan, something to keep everyone occupied and working towards getting the hell off this planet. Jules scratched his chin thoughtfully. We could organize them into teams, set tasks, make them feel like they are in a competition. With the prize being survival, Quill added, nodding. I like it. They spent the next few hours rallying the crew, outlining tasks and responsibilities with the kind of fervor usually reserved for motivational speakers or cult leaders. It was a gamble, but they were running low on options, and the last thing they needed was their own people turning on each other. All right, listen up, Quill shouted, addressing the gathered crew. We need to stay focused and work together if we're going to make it through this. We all want off this rock, and the only way that's happening is if we pull ourselves together. There was a murmur of agreement, the crew's attention shifting from bickering to determination. Jules stepped forward, his voice rising above the din. Remember, we're not just fighting the planet, we're fighting to keep our minds our own. Let's show this world what it means to mess with humans. And if we fail, Amara added with a grim smile, at least we'll go down fighting. The atmosphere shifted, a renewed sense of purpose rippling through the ranks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going, enough to stave off the despair that threatened to swallow them whole. As the crew dispersed, each member falling into their assigned roles, Quill felt a flicker of pride. They were battered and bruised, a motley group of misfits thrust into a situation that seemed almost comically impossible. Yet here they were, still standing, still fighting. Well, he said, turning to Amara and Jules, we're not dead yet. That's something. It's a miracle, Amara replied dryly, though her expression softened. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Jules chuckled, clapping Quill on the shoulder. Here's to another day of not dying. They shared a laugh, the kind that came from the depths of exhaustion and relief. It was a temporary reprieve, but in their world, temporary was good enough. As they watched the crew rally, working together despite the ever-present threat of chaos, Quill felt a flicker of something akin to hope. The planet was still a hostile, unpredictable nightmare, but they weren't alone in facing it. Together, they would find a way through. They had to. There wasn't really any other option. With a final glance at the crystalline forest, Quill turned back to his friends. All right, let's get to work. We still have a planet to outsmart. It wasn't much of a battle cry, but it would do. For now, it was enough to keep them moving forward, one defiant step at a time. Quill rubbed his temples, feeling the dull throb of an impending headache. Maybe it was the constant stress of trying to keep their brains from turning to mush, or perhaps it was the fact that he hadn't had a decent cup of coffee in weeks. Either way, he was one wrong word away from snapping like a cheap rubber band. What's the latest, Amara? He asked, trying to sound more interested than irritated. Amara's fingers danced over her handheld scanner, her eyes glued to the flickering screen. She was the kind of person who could multitask like a pro, making you question your own competence while doing so. Well, she said, her voice dry as ever, it seems our alien friends have a weakness. Please tell me it's something we can exploit, Jules chimed in, peering over her shoulder like an overeager student trying to cheat on an exam. It's not so much a weakness, Amara replied, glancing up with a wry smile, as it is a reminder that even mind-controlling entities have their limits. Turns out the wave's impact gets weaker when we focus on emotional connections. Jules blinked, his expression a mix of surprise and disbelief. You mean like hugging it out? Quill snorted. Doesn't sound like the worst idea. Might be better than our last plan of winging it and hoping for the best. Think about it, Amara continued, ignoring their sarcasm. When we're emotionally connected, it dilutes the wave's frequency somehow, almost like it can't handle the complexity or something. So, Quill rubbed his chin, trying to piece it together. If we focus on being human, we might just outsmart the wave, Amara finished, a gleam of determination in her eyes. That's a hell of a plot twist, Jules mused, scratching the back of his head. Aliens undone by feelings, who'd have thought? Yeah, who knew being a dysfunctional group of emotional misfits would finally pay off, Quill said, smirking. Amara tucked her scanner away and stood up, stretching her back with a groan. We need to double down on this. Rally the crew, get them talking, connecting, hell, make 'em hold hands if we have to. Great, Quill replied, looking around at the crew scattered about like disgruntled cats. Can't wait to play camp counselor in the middle of an alien forest, Jules chuckled. I've always wanted to sing Kumbaya surrounded by killer trees. As much as Quill wanted to mock the idea, he couldn't ignore the flicker of hope it brought. They needed something, anything, to rally around, and if their emotional baggage was the answer, then so be it. Right, he said, clapping his hands together. Let's herd these cats. The three of them moved through the campsite, gathering the crew with a mix of motivational speeches and thinly veiled threats. It was a fine line between encouragement and coercion, but it got the job done. When the crew was finally assembled, Quill took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their collective anticipation. All right, folks, he began, projecting his voice with the authority of someone who'd rather be doing anything else but knew better. We've got a new plan. Turns out our best weapon against the mind control wave is our own messy, emotional selves. There was a murmur of confusion and skepticism, punctuated by a few derisive snorts. Quill couldn't blame them. He wasn't entirely sold on it himself. Look, I know it sounds cheesy, he continued, but when we're emotionally connected, the wave struggles to maintain its grip. So I need all of you to focus on what makes us human. Talk, share stories, hell, even argue if you have to. Just don't let the wave isolate you. Amara stepped up, backing him up with her no-nonsense demeanor. This isn't just about survival. It's about showing that we can't be broken so easily. We can't let some alien frequency tear us apart. Jules added his support with a grin. Think of it as alien therapy. We're going to talk through our issues and send that wave packing. Slowly, the crew began to warm to the idea, their expressions shifting from doubt to resolve. They weren't soldiers, but they were survivors, and that counted for something. So, anyone got a good story? One of the crew members piped up, looking around awkwardly. Quill seized the moment, launching into a tale about one of their more disastrous missions. A botched supply run that had ended with them narrowly escaping a hostile moon and a particularly vengeful spaceport official. As he spoke, the crew began to relax, laughter breaking out as others chimed in with their own stories of misadventures and close calls. It was a bizarre group therapy session, but it worked. The more they shared, the more the tension in the air seemed to dissipate. Amara watched the scene with a small, satisfied smile. I think it's working, she said quietly to Quill and Jules. Feels like group therapy, Quill replied, watching the crew open up in ways they hadn't before. But if it keeps us alive, I won't complain. Who knew that talking about our feelings would be the key to survival? Jules added with a shake of his head. We should write a self-help book after this. Surviving alien mind control for dummies, Quill suggested with a smirk. Catchy, Amara said, rolling her eyes. The crew continued to bond, their voices blending into a comforting hum of camaraderie and resilience. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it was a start, and in their world that was more than they could have hoped for. As they settled into this strange new routine, Quill felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were still knee-deep in chaos, but now they had a way forward, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could outsmart the odds stacked against them. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the crystalline forest, Quill gathered with Amara and Jules, the trio forming a silent pact of determination. This might actually work, Amara said, her voice laced with cautious optimism. Here's to hoping, Quill replied, watching the crew as they huddled together in small groups, their laughter echoing through the trees. Jules stretched his arms over his head, his expression thoughtful. You know, if we get out of this, I'm gonna take a long vacation, somewhere far away from mind-controlling rocks. Count me in, Amara agreed, nodding. Preferably somewhere with a decent bar. Quill chuckled, the sound mingling with the distant rustle of leaves. First one's on me. In that moment, Quill realized that they were doing more than just buying time. They were fighting back, using the very thing that made them human, their emotions, their connections, their stubborn refusal to go quietly. As the night stretched on, they remained vigilant, keeping watch over their ragtag crew as they shared stories and forged bonds that would hopefully carry them through the trials ahead. For the first time in what felt like forever, Quill allowed himself a moment of hope. They were still a long way from safety, but with a little luck and a lot of grit, they'd find a way to survive. Together. The night passed with a strange sense of peace, the crew gradually settling into an uneasy rest, lulled by the comfort of their shared humanity. Quill stayed awake, his mind whirring with thoughts and possibilities, but for once he didn't feel alone in the dark. The next morning they reconvened, the cool air tinged with the scent of alien flora. Quill addressed the crew, his voice steady and sure. "We made progress last night, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need to keep pushing, keep connecting. We need to outsmart this thing." Amara took over, her tone firm. "Focus on what makes us human. Our relationships, our emotions, they are our best defenses right now." Jules nodded, pointing to the makeshift control unit. "And we keep working on this. If we can find a way to boost our emotional resilience, amplify it somehow, we might just get the upper hand." The crew nodded, their determination renewed. They were battered and bruised, but they weren't broken, and that was enough to keep them going. Over the next few days, they continued to bond, sharing stories and experiences, reinforcing their emotional connections. It was a slow, steady process, but gradually they began to feel stronger, more resilient against the wave's influence. Quill, Amara, and Jules worked tirelessly, brainstorming ways to enhance their newfound weapon. They experimented with different techniques, testing the limits of their emotional resilience. "How's it looking, Amara?" Quill asked one day, watching as she adjusted the scanner. Amara frowned, her eyes flicking over the data. "It's promising. We're seeing a definite decrease in wave interference, but we need more time." "Time's something we don't have a lot of," Jules observed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We'll make it work," Quill replied, his voice tinged with determination. "We've come too far to give up now." As they pressed on, the crew's bond grew stronger, their shared experiences creating a web of support and unity that even the mind control wave struggled to penetrate. In the meantime, Quill found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. They were a mismatched collection of ships and souls, held together by little more than duct tape and dreams. But they were also a testament to human resilience, to the power of connection in the face of insurmountable odds. "Do you ever think about what we'd be doing if we weren't stuck here?" Amara asked one evening, her voice soft in the dim light of their makeshift camp. "All the time," Quill admitted, glancing up at the stars. "But honestly, I can't imagine a better group to be stuck with." Jules grinned, raising an imaginary glass. "To surviving one day at a time." "To surviving," Quill and Amara echoed, their voices mingling with the night. As they settled into another restless night, Quill felt a sense of hope, fragile but real. They were still far from safe, but with each passing day they were one step closer to outsmarting the odds. And that was enough to keep them going, one defiant step at a time. Lysander Quill stood in front of the flickering hologram, the makeshift control unit buzzing ominously like a swarm of angry bees had taken residence within its wires. He squinted at the jumble of circuits, his expression a blend of concentration and the resignation of a man who had long accepted that his life was a carousel of chaos. He ran a hand through his unruly hair, making it stick up even more as if in protest. "So, what's the plan, Commander?" Amara Voss asked, her voice dry as the recycled air they breathed. She tapped her handheld scanner, which beeped in an annoying, persistent way, much like a nagging conscience. "The plan? Simple," Quill replied, his tone as flat as a starship's emergency ration. "We pour our hearts out like we're at a bloody space therapy session, and hope our mess of emotions is enough to make this alien wave collapse under its own existential crisis." Jules Kint, leaning casually against a crate that looked like it might collapse at any moment, chuckled. "Right, So the plan is talk about our feelings until the universe decides it's had enough of our whining. Exactly, Quill nodded sagely. If that doesn't work, we might consider interpretive dance as a last resort. Amara snorted, shaking her head. You know, in another life I could have been a psychologist, or maybe a bartender. I'm handy with both liquor and listening. You'd have made a hell of a bartender, Amara, Jules noted, pulling a wire from the contraption and watching the hologram flicker. I'd have tipped you generously for the privilege of drowning my sorrows in your company. The forest around them shimmered with a disquieting beauty, crystalline trees, catching the ever-dimming light like a million tiny mirrors. It was like standing inside a kaleidoscope, if that kaleidoscope was designed by a drunk optometrist. Quill focused on the crew who had gathered around, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and the sort of skepticism reserved for notoriously untrustworthy politicians. "All right, people," he said, clapping his hands together, which sent a puff of dust into the air. "Let's get this emotional show on the road. Do we get a script, or is this more of an improv situation?" Someone joked, their voice half drowned by the ambient hum of the alien landscape. "Improv, definitely," Quill replied, flashing a grin. "And remember, all the best performances come from the heart. Or, wherever it is you keep your emotions these days." Amara took center stage, her scanner held high like some ancient relic, and the crew watched with rapt attention. "According to my data, the alien wave thrives on isolation, on detachment. So, we're doing the opposite. We're going to get so damn connected that it won't know what hit it." "Sounds like a plan," Jules said, his voice carrying an edge of mischief. "Let's make this wave so uncomfortable it wishes it had never left its primordial soup." The crew began as if they were at an awkward team-building retreat. People shuffled their feet, cleared their throats, and exchanged sheepish glances. Quill could almost hear the sound of emotional gears grinding as they tried to shift into vulnerable mode. "So, has anyone got a story to share?" Amara prompted with the patience of a saint, or at least someone who had decided not to murder everyone yet. A silence thick enough to slice with a vibroblade hung in the air. Then finally someone spoke up, a scruffy mechanic named Taryn, who'd seen more warp cores than he had showered in the past month. "All right, I'll bite," Taryn said, scratching his head. "I remember this one time back when we were on that rust bucket of a planet Raxus. We were scavenging parts and stumbled into a nest of space lizards. Nasty buggers. Anyway, turns out they really hate the sound of an out-of-tune harmonica." Laughter rippled through the group, the sound echoing through the crystalline forest like a defiant hymn. It was infectious, spreading from person to person, each chuckle a small rebellion against the oppressive wave. Quill felt a surge of something warm and unfamiliar, pride, maybe, as he watched the crew loosen up. They started to share more stories, each one a brick in the wall they were building against the alien onslaught. It was messy, raw, and utterly human. Amara worked her scanner with a fervor, her eyes glued to the data. "We're seeing fluctuations," she reported, her voice tinged with excitement. "The wave's interference is dropping, not by much, but it's something." "See," Jules grinned, nudging Quill with an elbow. Turns out all we needed was a little group therapy. Who knew emotional baggage could be weaponized? "I'm still waiting for the self-help book royalties," Quill replied with a smirk. "Duct tape and emotions, the human guide to surviving alien waves." The wave of camaraderie continued to build, the crew finding common ground in their shared experiences. They laughed, groaned, and occasionally yelled, the cacophony of human connection weaving through the air like a tapestry of defiance. The mind control wave, once a suffocating presence, began to recede like a tide, reluctant, grudging. Jules glanced at Amara, his brow furrowed in thought. "You think we can boost this somehow? Make it more potent?" Amara considered his suggestion, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the scanner. "We might be able to amplify the emotional resonance, use the makeshift control unit to broadcast it like some kind of emotional supernova." "Sounds risky," Quill commented, eyeing the contraption as if it might explode, which, knowing their luck, wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. "Risky is our middle name," Amara shot back with a wry smile. "Besides, what have we got to lose?" "Our sanity," Jules suggested. "Oh, wait, too late." They got to work, the three of them huddled around the makeshift control unit like conspirators plotting a grand heist. Wires were twisted, circuits rerouted, and more than a few choice expletives were uttered when things sparked unexpectedly. "All right, let's give this a whirl," Amara said, stepping back and brushing her hands on her pants. "Everyone ready?" The crew nodded, their expressions a mix of hope and the resigned acceptance of those who had long learned to roll with the universe's punches. Quill took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "Okay, folks, let's crank up the feels and give this wave a taste of what humanity's made of." Amara activated the makeshift control unit, her fingers dancing over the controls. The device hummed with an eerie resonance, the surrounding air vibrating subtly with the force of it. The crew gathered closer, their voices rising in a chaotic symphony of stories, arguments, and laughter. It was an orchestra of humanity, each note a testament to their strength, their resilience. Jules watched the hologram, his eyes widening slightly. "It's working. The wave's destabilizing." Quill felt a thrill of triumph, his heart pounding in time with the pulsing energy around him. "Keep it up. Let's show this wave what it means to be human." The wave's influence wavered, the oppressive weight lifting as the crew poured their hearts into the effort. They shouted and sang, a raucous medley of emotion that filled the forest with a vibrant, defiant life. Amara's scanner beeped, the sound cutting through the noise like a clarion call. "We're almost there. Just a little more." Quill could feel the strain, the weight of their collective willpower pressing against the encroaching wave. "Come on, people, let's blow this thing to hell." With one final surge of emotion, the wave collapsed, its structure crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. The air around them shifted, the oppressive weight lifting as the alien presence withdrew, defeated. Silence fell, the crew standing in stunned disbelief at their own success. It was a victory carved from the raw, messy chaos of human emotion, a testament to their resilience. Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her face breaking into a grin. "We did it. We actually did it." Jules punched the air, a whoop of joy escaping him. "Take that, you alien bastards." Quill looked around at his crew, his heart swelling with pride. "We showed them what it means to be human, and we did it together." The crew erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the forest like a triumphant anthem. They had faced the impossible and come out on top, their bonds forged in the fires of adversity. As they celebrated, Quill felt the weight of the universe lift, if only for a moment. They were still far from safety, but they had beaten the odds once more, and that was enough to give him hope. "First drinks on me," Quill promised, his voice carrying above the joyful din. Jules laughed, clapping him on the back. "Let's hope the aliens stocked up on good booze." Amara nodded, her gaze sweeping over the crew. "We've earned it, every damn drop." They stood together, united in their victory, a small band of misfits who had dared to defy the unknown. And as they gazed at the crystalline forest around them, they knew there were more challenges ahead, but they'd face them together. Together they were unstoppable. Silence. Sweet, sweet silence. Well, as silent as you can get on an alien planet with a bunch of crystal trees that reflect sound, like they're trying to audition for an avant-garde orchestra. But it was an improvement from the mind-warping buzz of the control wave. So the crew stood there, soaking in the relative quiet like kids who've stumbled upon a candy store with no adult supervision. Lysander Quill, who had long ago accepted that chaos was his jam, took a moment to marvel at the fact that they hadn't all turned into mindless drones. He looked around at his crew, a collection of misfits and rejects that the galaxy had spat out and forgotten. A group that had somehow stuck together through thick and thin, and very thin, like paper thin, almost see-through kind of thin. "We're still here," Quill said, almost to himself. "That's something." Amara Voss, who had proven herself handy with both liquor and listening, stood nearby, her trusty handheld scanner dangling like a third arm. She raised an eyebrow at Quill's proclamation. "Wow, Quill, don't get too enthusiastic. You might sprain something." Jules Kint, who always found the humor in the direst situations, chuckled. "I think he's going for the understated heroism angle. Stealth pride, you know." "I can respect that," Amara said, shrugging. "We're alive, and we just kicked an alien mind wave's ass. Not a bad day in the universe." The crew had gathered in a loose circle, the triumph still fresh on their faces. They'd managed to outwit an alien force with nothing but a makeshift control unit and a hefty dose of human emotion. It was the kind of victory that made you feel a little invincible, even if you were still wearing yesterday's socks. Taryn, the scruffy mechanic, was fiddling with a piece of equipment that looked suspiciously like a toaster. "So now what? Do we just hang out here and hope the aliens don't come back with a bigger stick?" "Well, we've got a whole planet to ourselves now," Quill replied. "Might as well make the most of it. Colonize the place, put up a few shacks, maybe start a farm. I hear crystalline carrots are all the rage," Amara snorted. "Sure, as long as we don't have to eat them. I'm already sick of the local cuisine." Jules eyed the crystalline forest, which, despite its eeriness, had a certain kind of beauty. "Think we could build something here? Make it a home?" Quill glanced around, considering the ragtag fleet they'd somehow kept afloat. "We've built homes out of worse. And hell, I think we've earned the right to try." The thought of settling on this alien world was a daunting one, but the crew seemed to warm to the idea, the prospect of solid ground under their feet for a change, instead of the cold metal of a ship's hull. It was a chance to put down roots. Well, metaphorical ones. They weren't about to start sprouting leaves. "So, we set up camp," Amara said, nodding as she looked around. "Get organized, figure out what we need to survive here long term." "First order of business," Jules interjected with a grin, "is finding the nearest watering hole. Preferably one that serves something stronger than recycled ship water." The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the crystalline trees, a reminder that they were still human, still capable of joy and camaraderie in the face of the unknown. The threat of the mind control wave might have been vanquished for now, but the challenges of colonizing an alien world were just beginning. Quill rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of leadership settle in once again. "Okay, let's get practical. First, we need to secure the area. Make sure there are no nasty surprises waiting for us." Amara nodded, already checking her scanner for any leftover alien signals. "I'll sweep the perimeter. Make sure we're not sitting ducks." Jules took stock of the supplies they had managed to salvage. "I'm on resource duty. See what we can scavenge from the ships and what's edible, or at least not deadly, out there." Taryn, the ever-unwashed mechanical genius, grinned. "I'll get to work on some defenses. Maybe rig up a barrier of some sort. And hey, if we find a way to harness these crystal trees, we could have the fanciest light show this side of the galaxy." It was a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. As plans went, it was about as sturdy as a paper umbrella in a meteor storm, but it was something. The crew dispersed, each member setting about their tasks with a determination born from necessity. There was work to be done, and if they wanted to turn this crystal jungle into a home, they had to start somewhere. Quill watched them go, feeling a flicker of something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time: hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. It made you believe in things like tomorrow and possibilities, and in a universe that specialized in dashing dreams, it was about as safe as juggling plasma grenades. But for once, Quill decided to hold onto it. It was dangerous, sure, but it was better than the alternative. Better than letting the universe grind you down until you were nothing more than stardust. As the crew worked, Quill found himself reflecting on their journey. How far they'd come, the risks they'd taken, and the sheer stubbornness it took to get here. They'd faced the worst the galaxy had to offer and somehow emerged, if not unscathed, then at least intact. And maybe, just maybe, they'd carved out a little corner of the universe where they could belong, a place to call their own. It wasn't perfect, but then neither were they. They were human after all, and imperfection was kind of their thing. Jules sidled up to Quill, holding what looked like a makeshift drink in his hand. "To the future," he said, raising his cup in a mock toast. "May it be slightly less terrifying than the past." Quill clinked his own cup against Jules', the two of them sharing a moment of silent camaraderie. "I'll drink to that." The day wore on, and as the twin suns began to set, the crew gathered around a fire that crackled in the dim light. The air was still, the oppressive weight of the mind control wave a distant memory, and for the first time in a long time, they could breathe easy. Amara was recounting one of her tales, her voice carrying through the night air like a bomb. "And that's when I realized I'd been trying to fix the reactor with a spoon instead of the flux calibrator," she said, shaking her head. "Can't say I've ever lived that one down." Taran was clutching his sides, laughter spilling out of him in waves. "A spoon, really? And here I thought I was the only one who made tech repairs with kitchen utensils." Jules was busy whittling a piece of crystal into something that vaguely resembled a cup, his concentration lending a rare quiet to his usual banter. "Hey, sometimes improvisation is the mother of invention, or the stepmother. Or maybe just the weird aunt who crashes on your couch uninvited." Quill watched them, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire. These people, this crew, they were more than just colleagues or companions. They were family, bound together by shared hardship and a refusal to quit. "So, Quill," Amara said, fixing him with a teasing look, "what's your grand plan for our new colony? Any sweeping visions of the future you'd like to share?" Quill considered this, the flickering firelight casting shadows across his face. "I figure we build a nice little settlement, maybe open a bar, start a community, make it a place where we can all belong." "A bar, huh?" Jules said with a smirk. "I knew you'd see the potential in my bartending skills eventually." Quill grinned. "Hey, you can't underestimate the power of a good drink and a little human connection. We've seen what it can do." The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the crystalline forest, a reminder of their humanity in the face of the unknown. It was a sound that spoke to resilience, to strength, and to the unbreakable bonds that had kept them together through it all. As the fire crackled and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the crew settled into a comfortable silence. They had a long road ahead of them, but for now, they were content to just be. To exist in this moment of peace, however fleeting it might be. Quill looked around at the faces of his crew, his family, and felt that dangerous flicker of hope flare into something brighter. They'd faced the impossible and come out the other side, stronger and more united than ever. And as they sat there under a sky filled with alien stars, Quill knew that whatever the future held, they'd face it together. Because, in the end, that was the real power of human connection. It was messy and chaotic and imperfect, but it was also fierce and unyielding. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to carve out a little piece of the universe where they could belong. "All right, folks," Quill said, raising his cup once more. "Here's to us, to the challenges we've faced and the ones still to come, to the life we're building here one day at a time." The crew raised their cups in unison, their voices ringing out into the night. To us, it was the beginning of something new, something that promised hope and possibility. And as they sat there, bathed in the glow of the firelight, they knew they were ready to face whatever the galaxy had to throw at them. Together, they were unstoppable.